Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we're looking at this orchid, which has a nickname. It's called Yellow Mini Mark. Of course, it's just a nickname, and the original name is listed at the bottom of the video, but the pod parent is a cross between Lobii and Tetraspis. So it's almost near primary hybrid, but not quite. But this orchid still has a sequential blooming capability, which I just love really much. This bloom cycle, this orchid gives me 2 flower spike. And usually springtime is when this orchid really put out a good show. And because of its sequential blooming capability, it will continue to just give me 2, 3, sometimes 1 flower after the first flush of spring bloom. And sometimes it could go on for the entire year. I have had this orchid, I think, 4 years now, I think. And every year it's a very reliable bloomer. And it's not fuzzy because honestly I have not done anything special to this orchid other than a somewhat unconventional growing method, and that is a moss no hold method. So essentially it's really just a 12-ounce plastic cup with no drainage hole, and I put very small amount of sphagnum moss in it, in between the roots. And the trick or the tip for this growing method is that the sphagnum moss cannot be packed too tightly because it needs to have that very airy mixture in between roots so that it's water retentive, but then at the same time that wet dry cycle can complete relatively quickly. And for me, I like to make sure my orchids all can achieve that wet dry cycle within a week. That's how I like to water my orchid. So this orchid, if I provide about 1/8 of a cup of water, that 1 week wet dry cycle is very easily achieved. I still give this orchid 1/8 of a cup in the winter time, but the interval in terms of watering would then be extended to about 2 weeks or so. And in terms of fertilizer, this orchid also receives 25% strength fertilizer like most of my orchids. And so it's very typical orchid care that I provide. So this orchid is really, I guess, just not fuzzy, typical orchids. The only downside that I wish this orchid would have really is fragrance. Its color is really interesting in terms of, the white center, yellow background, and then orange lip. And then at the bottom sepal, sometimes even the top petals, you'll see some tiny spots. Sometimes I call those freckles. And because of all these characteristics, the tiny freckles, the orange lips, that's why this orchid also got this Yellow Mini Mark nickname. Later in the video, you'll see a comparison between my white Mini Mark, typical Mini Mark, and this orchid, and you'll see what I mean. If you're new to this orchid hobby, for orchids with sequential blooming capabilities like this one does, when the flower spikes are green, you want to make sure you keep them, because for the same year, the orchid may continue to grow its flower spike and give you additional blooms. And sometimes they will keep their flower spike green for the next blooming season, which sometimes could be next year. It really depends on the individual orchids. For this one, it does have sequential blooming capability, and it would bloom pretty much throughout the whole year. Not continuously, because obviously it takes time for the buds to form, but usually after all the flowers are gone, it takes maybe 3 to 4 weeks before you start to see new buds forming again. But just like that, it continues for pretty much the whole year. And then in winter time is when this orchid will start to, I guess, retire its flower spike. Oh, but by the way, this orchid typically keep its green flower spike for 2 years, and then it would, die. They would die back, and then the following spring, this orchid would put out new flower spikes. I have some orchids that would keep their flower spikes for 3 years, but the norm is typically 2 years, because I see that in my Sweet Memory Leodoros and Sweet Memory M's, and a few other orchids that would have the sequential blooming capabilities to keep their flower spikes for around 2 years. That's kind of the typical average. For 3 years or longer, it really depends. But then I also have another one that's a primary hybrid. It's a cross between Zebrina and I think Violacea. That one, the flower spikes are like always green for 3-4 years and more. And then Mariae, the same thing. Right now I think it's producing its 5th or 6th flower spike, and all the old flower spikes are still intact, green, and are still blooming at their very tips. So it really depends on the individual orchid, but this one, 2 years or so, it would want to grow new flower spikes. So this is just a video to give you a sense of what the roots look like. This cup doesn't have any drainage hole, so this method really requires a little bit more attention when it comes to watering. You either water this orchid with a set amount of water, which I do that. It's 1/8 of a cup every time. But at the end of the month, I also soak this orchid with just pure water. And the logic behind this is you want to make sure this orchid has a way to get rid of excess salt buildup from the unused fertilizer in the medium. So that's what I do. But when you drain out the water, you want to make sure you tilt it and let it drip until it will not drip anymore, and then put it back for an hour or so, and then go back to see if there's still excess water at the very bottom due to gravity. And if there is, continue to drain out the excess water until it wouldn't drip anymore. And then that's how I will be sure that this orchid is ready to go for another week. So here are just some photos of the comparison that I promised you, and coming up we'll have a quick video clip as well. So this is the white mini mark compared against the yellow mini mark. Its name is actually quite long, so I don't remember always, so I was just call it my yellow mini mark. You see how their orange lips are similar, even though the shapes aren't the same, but they all have freckles, and that's why sometimes I kind of see them as close relatives, even though how they look may completely be coincidental, that they just look similar but maybe have very different parentage. I haven't really had the time to look into them yet, but they're both a miniature compact grower. This time around in the video, I just happened to let the flower spike grow naturally. I didn't stake them up, so that they don't grow upright. Sometimes one year I would want to train my flower spike, sometimes I don't, and this time around I just decided to let them grow naturally however they want. The one on the right, the yellow one, if you keep letting the flower spike to grow longer, it tends to want to curl and go around. It doesn't just go straight down. So I think going forward in the future, I may try to prop it up a little bit more upward so that it would take a little less horizontal space. Overall, this yellow orchid is a very interesting and hardy orchid to grow. If you ever come across it, I highly recommend it. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!